everyone, welcome to another Melta podcast. With me today is our special guest, Chris Reese. He's an experienced English teacher, teacher trainer, and instructional designer from the United States. He has over 10 years of international experience from teaching and training in Ukraine before the war to his current role in Bangkok, Thailand. He's worked with Cambridge Assessment, developed digital learning programs, and is exploring how artificial intelligence can transform English teaching. So, Chris, I'm really excited to dive with you. So,
Well, thank you for
very
having
nice
me.
to have you with us. Would you like to add something to the introduction? Any
No, I think
comments?
that all sounds very gracious, and I think that all sounds very when you hear it back, it sounds really impressive, but when you're doing it, it's a lot of really kind of boring days back to back. But we'll see what we've got to talk about. I think we'll find something.
Okay. So, let's kick off with the first question. You have been an English teacher and trainer. And instructional design across different countries. Can you tell us what first drew you into teaching English and how your career evolved over time?
Yeah, I think my career trajectory kind of mirrored a lot of people in that that wasn't plan A. Plan A, actually, when I did my undergraduate degree, I did my undergraduate in anthropology. And then I tried to get into grad school for anthropology unsuccessfully. So I had some time. I planned on taking a gap year. So I did, my qualifications, got hired by a school. Um, I really think because the person who interviewed me at that school had gone to the same university that I did. So I really got lucky with my first position. Started teaching in Kiev, uprooted everything, moved from Knoxville, Tennessee to Kiev, Ukraine, and started working there in my first role. And that was when I kind of fell in love with teaching. I had done a bit of teaching before. I had worked as a tutor for my university. But that was my first kind of, let's say, real teaching job. And from there, it was just a matter of gaining more qualifications, going to bigger and better and brighter schools, and then eventually winding up in teacher training and helping people to become teachers.
Back to Ukraine. You said that you lived in Ukraine. I also lived in Ukraine. Before getting to the emotional stuff of the war, unfortunately, we'll get to that sooner or later. But um, let's talk mostly about the experience. You lived and worked in Ukraine for several years, and then can you tell us about your experience, like teaching and training teacher there? And if you're talking about, let's say, their professional life, and if you'd like to share anything about the culture in
Sure.
Ukraine.
I found the adjustment to Ukraine to be very easy. I always found that people, because I mean, you always interact with people everywhere you live. I found that people in Ukraine were always extremely warm, extremely welcoming, extremely friendly, extremely clever, and extremely well educated, by and large. Um, so the adjustment period of moving to Ukraine wasn't super duper difficult. When I moved to Ukraine in 2015, um, the level of English at the time wasn't as high as it is now. It was still not bad by international standards, but it wasn't nearly as good as it is right now, because right now it's like quite impressive by international standards in many ways. Um, I think a lot of that too was living in Kiev. I always tell people that Kiev is the best city in the world, and there's nothing that anyone can do to change my mind about that. But yeah, the process of adjusting, the fact that people are always so friendly and so welcoming, so always willing to help out with everything. Professionally, I think that if we talk about English teaching in general, most of my experience in Ukraine was dealing with private sector, so private language schools, things like that, which are demanding. The hours are long and the hours are hard. But at the same time, it was always a very welcoming, friendly environment. So lots of emphasis on professional development and lots of emphasis on really kind of being the best that you could be. And so it was hard, but everyone was always kind of on the same mission. So you never really minded that much.
You only know how valuable it is when you lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So back to 2019 when we first met for the first and only time. And remember the question I asked you. Well, you just said that you worked for one school there. And I
Yeah.
know that usually we don't mention names, but I have to mention it. It was a great conference
Right.
when we participated. Why did you decide to participate? And what were your impressions?
I originally started to participate in conferences in general because I was advised to do so basically by my boss at the time, who said, "Hey, look, kind of, you've got potential. We think you've got potential. We want you to help represent the school at different conferences." That was before I worked for Grade, but that was where I got a lot of experience kind of working as a presenter. I had the opportunity to present together with Cambridge University Press a few times, going through different cities in Kiev to Kharkiv, to Odessa, to Mykolaiv, doing these, massive, honestly terrifying seminar tours, if I'm honest. So by the time we got to the Grade conference in 2019, I had actually just joined the team that year, and because they were organizing it, they were using a lot of their teachers to kind of give presentations. So that was kind of how I wound up there. I remember I was talking about project-based learning, I think. Um, so yeah, that was something that we always did as a professional development tactic, as a way to kind of push us to A, share what we knew or what we had learned with other people, but B, give us an excuse to dig deeper into the things that we were interested in. Because anytime you prepare a session like that, you always find out so much more about the topic. Like, as I used projects and project-based learning before I gave that session, obviously, but through the process of researching and kind of formulating my thoughts and ideas into one session, I got to know much, much more about it. I still remember the question you asked me, by the way.
Yeah, about the two ladies who have always
Yeah.
been, yeah, they used to be together all the time. And actually, I had another question which I wanted to ask, but I regret not asking it. Maybe I can ask it during the interview. Yeah. How were your impressions about meeting Adrian Underhill? Was it the first time or?
That was my first time meeting him. Yeah. What always impresses me whenever you meet any of these guys who are kind of the big names, a lot of times there's the expression like, don't meet your heroes, because like you'll just be disappointed. But I find it's just the opposite in many cases, that when I meet the big names, maybe I've just been very fortunate, but I've generally had a very positive experience. And Adrian Underhill was no different. I found him to be every bit of what I expected, and in a good way.
Well, actually, I have a personal experience with him. People like him, you would think they would be so self-centered, but when I talked to him, he talked to me as if we were lifetime friends. And I told him, "Can we wait for just a second? My wife wants to have a photo with you." You know,
Mhm.
I took a photo for my wife the first time. It didn't work, and we only realized after he left. And then, I had a problem with my wife. No need to talk too much about that. And so I had to find him, and I did find him. I say, "I'm sorry, can you please take another photo?" I was expecting him to say, "Oh, okay, I'm busy or something," but I was surprised because he said, "Yeah, of course, no problem." And the biggest surprise was he was waiting for me until I brought my wife and took another photo. And he said, "Is everything okay?" So yeah, that's the photo. So from my personal experience, when he had the session, uh, it was amazing. And also as a person, I felt that he was, he deals with you as a friend. That's my personal experience. So yeah, I
I
do
fully
remember that. Yeah. Well, something we have to do because we both lived in Ukraine and we both have nations. And I think you and I, we both share the pain and the hopes for the future. Uh, Back to Ukraine. When the war started, were you in Ukraine?
Yes, yes, my wife and I were. I mean, we woke up in our apartment, not far from the Lugyanska station, on the day the war started. So yeah, we were very much there.
Were you expecting it? I know that too much there was too much news, a lot of people talking. Were you expecting it, or you said no, this would never happen, this is just news, or
Honestly, I thought that it. I was quite surprised because I thought, okay, there's no way, because it would be so incredibly pointless, because it's just in every it's one of those situations where just everyone loses. There's no good that comes of it, so it makes no sense. So yeah, I was a bit surprised. Putting it mildly. Yeah.
yeah. And how did you leave Ukraine? Did you leave directly, or you waited for some time? Can you tell about your
we
journey?
we waited for a couple of weeks, when there was a particularly disturbing bit of news that we had seen, and it was kind of at that point that we decided, okay, we're going to get on the next train out. So we wound up taking a train to Lviv, stayed with some of my wife's family in Lviv. Then we crossed the border, took a train to Hamburg to Germany through Poland, and then we stayed in Hamburg for a few months, for kind of various complicated reasons with the local Hamburg administration and paperwork. We had some difficulties, so we had to look for work outside of Germany, and that was when I actually found the position that I have now, managing a partner program or managing a small language program in Thailand.
How long did you stay in Germany?
Only for a couple of months. I only had 3 months, so I think we left after about 8 weeks.
Uh, Even though I expect the answer because I suffer the same. Why didn't you try to find something in Germany?
We had a really complicated situation where basically, because of the policy that the German government had passed, my wife was able to easily get residency, but they couldn't figure out which statute under to my understanding, and this was a few years ago, so I could be misremembering. Um, to my understanding, the issue was that the implementation of the refugee policy for Ukrainians was decided, of course, at the national level, but implemented at the regional level. And all the regions kind of had their own separate little different ways of implementing the policy. And in Hamburg, basically, they said, yeah, we want to give you this right, like we want to give you the residency, but we don't know how to do it. So what they actually told us was, if you wait, we won't deport you. Just wait, and we'll figure it out. Which it was very gracious of them, because by rights they could have said, "Hey, you've got your 90 days. When that's up, get out." And they would have had every right to do that. So it was very gracious of them the way they did it. But I had talked to a few different German companies. I had offers waiting, but they all said the same thing, which was, we can't touch you until you have your visa. We can't touch you until you have your residency permit because we don't want to get in trouble. So it was, faced with that uncertainty. We also were looking for things outside of Germany, and just by chance, I found the position that I'm in now.
You've worked for or with teacher training, CELTA and Delta, and from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that the new teachers face today, and how do you think you can help them?
Yeah. I think when I really think about it, the key issue that a lot of new teachers have is understanding that the process of learning happens inside the student, not necessarily from the teacher. And that sounds like a really general point, but this has all sorts of little effects. So one is that, that the students learn when they're engaged and when they're thinking about things. They don't necessarily learn when the teacher's talking. That doesn't mean that teacher explanations aren't useful. They can be very useful when delivered in the right amount and at the right time. But if in the wrong amount and all the time, teacher talk kind of takes away from the learning opportunities because it takes this thinking time away. So one of the things that a lot of teachers with new and experienced really struggle with is the idea of really limiting and streamlining the way they talk to their students and really thinking about the ways that they're going to convey important information. Be that for language teaching, that could be convey the meaning and use of a grammar structure. That could be, introducing lexis to students. That could be introducing reading or listening strategies, or approaches to teaching writing. But not thinking necessarily about how am I going to explain this, because that becomes very teacher centered. But how are the students going to learn this, and what do they need to learn this? And that goes in, and once you start thinking about that, you really start understanding a lot of important things, like when we get to instructions, right? Giving clear instructions to language learners is something we have to do every single lesson. But when I think about, if I switch from how do I give good instructions to how are the students going to understand what to do, we might get to very different conclusions about how to set up an activity. If it's something really complicated, maybe it makes just a lot more sense to give them a short text with the instructions, give them 30 seconds to read it, and then ask a couple questions to check they've got it, rather than trying to go through this big 5-minute explanation of how to play a board game. And in many ways, that mirrors what we would do in the real world, right? If we take that example, learning to play a board game, usually a lot of people are going to sit down and read the instructions, and then from that, think about how to play the game for a complicated activity. Now, you might also sit and have a friend walk you through the game step by step, so in little chunks, which would also be an effective way of giving instructions, right? What you probably won't want is you won't want that friend who knows how to play to give you a 10-minute lecture on the instructions of the board game and say, okay, let's go. That's probably not going to help you learn to play the board game. And when we teach, we set up a bunch of little board games every single lesson. They're not really board games, they're activities, but that's one way to think about it. So really, I guess the key point is really thinking about the lesson in the students' terms and what kind of experience they're going to have and how they're going to access and engage with the lesson, rather than thinking about what am I going to do? Because what we're going to do comes out of how the students engage.
Nice. Since we're talking about Delta and Delta, and according to your background with AI, I'm not going to ask the same question, how do you think AI can help teachers? Because that's the question that everyone asks. But I'd like to have a different question. With the existence of AI, like ChatGPT, Grok, Geminians, whatever, do you think the new teachers still need Celta or Delta or any other kind of training?
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt in my mind. There's a few reasons for that. I'm going to lean on some research that was done regarding AI. I don't have the names of the studies off the top of my head, but I do roughly remember what they studied in them. So before I get to my point, a little bit of background information. There was a study done by the Harvard Business Review where they were looking at copywriters. So not teaching, nothing teaching related. They were looking at people who write copy for marketing and advertising. They took a large team of copywriters in the company, and they had them use like an AI writing assistant to help them. I think this was back in GPT 3.5. So I was going to say a long time ago, but in AI, it's a long time ago, but in reality, it was like 2 years ago. So what they found was that if you took the weakest or the weaker copywriters on the team, when they used AI, the quality of their copy went way, way, way up. If you took the middle group, they found that, well, the quality wasn't necessarily better or worse, but they got a bit more efficient. But if you took the highest, most effective, their quality actually decreased and they were slower. So kind of the really experienced, talented copywriters just lost across the board. There have been similar studies that have come out with coding, like writing code, where similar findings, or where they found similar findings that young, or like, let's say, less experienced coders tend to find a benefit from having an AI copilot to help them, whereas a senior developer who's got 15 years of experience is actually going to work faster and better without AI in many cases. So what does this tell us? This tells us that, well, AI tends to aggregate towards the middle. So it's going to take the broad average of everything that's done. If you are below average, you will see an improvement. The problem is, I don't know many teachers who want to be below average. I think most teachers would like to be at least average, hopefully above average, maybe even excellent one day. So that already tells us, that hey, there may be a problem with this. Another story before I get to kind of my full answer. This comes from a CELTA that I was working on recently, where we were going over we were going over how to develop comprehension questions for a reading text. So basically, how to identify the key points in the text, how to build and make the questions on them. And we went through, and while I was working with this trainee, we went through everything. And she effectively says to me something along the lines of, I don't know how you do that. I just use ChatGPT for everything. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, when I started teaching, there was no ChatGPT to do it for you. You had to just be able to do it. But because of that now, because I use AI in my work all the time, I'm a big advocate of using AI in work, actually. But that has to be balanced with knowing how to do the job yourself, because AI is essentially like an unpaid intern. So getting back to the question, do people need teacher training nowadays, even though everything can be done by ChatGPT? Well, I would just pose a couple of questions. One is, how will you know when it gives you junk? Because if you haven't got any training or knowledge or theory to fall back on, or experience, and experience can lie to us a little bit, because the way we understand our own experience is very subjective. And it's also very much coded with how we view ourselves. So if I'm a very, very confident person and I believe that everything I do works, then regardless of whether or not what I did worked, I'm more likely to believe that it actually did, even if it went horribly wrongly. Likewise, if I'm a very neurotic person, I'm very introspective and I'm very unsure, even if what I do goes amazingly well, I'm likely to see it as being a failure. So this idea that we can objectively rate our own experience, to me, is very, very suspect. I see this all the time when I talk to teachers about their impressions of a lesson that they've taught. So given that our experience is, of course, useful and necessary, but may not always be a reliable indicator of like judging if something's good or bad, we need to have that sort of backbone of, okay, I know that this is the way this is done. I know that this works because of X, Y, or Z. I know that this has been tested in research. I know that this kind of question has this effect on students, and this kind of question has this effect. I know that if I want to encourage learners to skim or to scan, I need to set a short time limit. Whereas if I want more detailed reading, I need a long time limit. And these are all fundamental things that you get from high quality teacher training courses. Now, and this isn't just a CELTA or Delta thing. Like, this is any high quality teacher education is going to give you these things. So, an analogy would be something like calculators for mathematicians. Like, do professional engineers use calculators? Yes. They use things far more complicated than calculators. They've got the Excel sheets and they've got like the crazy, like super math calculators. But if you ask these guys to do it by hand, I'm sure a lot of the really good ones could. It would take them a long time, maybe, but I'm sure they could do it. And in teaching, I think we've got the same thing. So yeah, absolutely need teacher education in the age of AI. And I would say that implementing AI effectively, responsibly, and ethically should be a component of all teacher training moving forward because it's that important.
Even in the future, as you just said, like 1 year for us
Mm.
is short time, but for AI is long time. So even in the future, we know uh, a lot of things can change. Maybe as we speak, they are definitely working on something. So do you think we can, or how do you think it's going to affect our teaching in the future with this, you know, everyday, let's say, improvements?
I saw something really interesting. I was doing and this could be a temporary finding. I'm working on my dissertation research, my MA dissertation research right now for the University of Chichester. Now that we're through, and what I'm researching is um, I'm looking at the impact of an AI program, which I've designed, which I've built to help people learn how to write. Um, and I'm through the data collection point. So I'm currently in the writing point, but I have all my data and I kind of know what everything says at this point. Um, but just as an anecdotal finding from the process of doing the research, I mean, the research was basically I gave the tool to a bunch of students and let them use it once a week, every week for 8 weeks and saw what happened. Um, and there's a really interesting thing that happened because I had spent a long time getting this AI program to give like really good feedback. And I think I was pretty successful getting it to give really good feedback. Um, so what would happen is that the students who were using it would get the feedback and they'd read it and they'd call me over and they'd say, teacher, can you look at this? And they would look at it and say, teacher, what do you think? And so I would look at their draft and I would, look at the feedback. And nine I was going to say 9 times out of 10 to be conservative, but I'm thinking there actually wasn't a single time that I looked at the feedback that they got from AI and thought that's not right. It had a 100% point of me looking at that going, yeah, that's reasonable. And that's something that this student could absolutely work on. But the important thing here isn't that the AI worked. The important thing here is that even though the AI worked, they still wanted my opinion because they wanted the opinion of the teacher, of the human, of the person they know and they trust. So there's this element, I think, of human relationships. And by the way, this is something that's borne out in the research as well, is that students, by and large, prefer feedback from a human over that of a machine, even when they say the same thing. So this finding isn't at all surprising to me. I wouldn't even call it a finding because I wasn't really testing for it, but just something anecdotally that I saw through the process of doing the research. So it doesn't surprise me at all. But I think what this does tell us is that, that human element is something that we all really, really crave at the end of the day. And the reason that we learn languages at the end of the day for many, many people is to communicate with other people and make themselves to really hear other people and be heard by other people. And the teacher, especially in the early to mid stages of learning, is probably the person who's making the most effort to hear you in your second language. And that's a strong connection.
Okay.
Right. So I guess to kind of wrap all of that up, a long story short, for the AI bit, are we still going to be necessary? Is yes, we are. But what role that might look like may be a bit different. And so we'll need to become comfortable with that.
I remember the human element. I watched a film for Tom Hanks. I think it
Mm.
was Sully or Scully or something like that. Have you watched
Mm.
it?
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
One of the pilots and like we
Yes.
don't, yeah, and they were accusing him of destroying the plane. And then at the end of the film, they said that you missed something. The AI missed something extremely important as well. I think he called it the human factor instead of the
Yes.
human element. Yeah.
And this is when you look at, for example, AI design by people who, and I've done some professional certifications for my dissertation in AI program design, things like this. Like, and I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, but when you talk to experts about AI, one of the things they always say is, look, the human has always got to be in the loop somewhere. There's always got to be a human at some point, because this goes back to a quote back in the, I believe, 80s from IBM. They said that computers should never make management decisions because computers can't be held accountable when they go wrong. I generally have the same view of AI in the classroom, which is that the AI should never be allowed to run the show, because then if something goes wrong, like really wrong, we can't blame it on anyone. We can't hold the AI responsible. What can we do?
I see what you're saying. I see what you mean. Okay, so we have covered the AI because many people ask about the AI and how we can use it. How how much can we trust it? And I think you have put that really nicely. So thank you very much. Um, now, back to your experience. You have taught led projects in Ukraine, Thailand, any other countries?
I mean, we've had, in terms of programs I've led, that's where they've been based. But like on teacher training, we've had from over 20 different countries. We've had teachers from India, from Ethiopia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Poland, you name it. So
Okay. So have you noticed any changes how uh, each country or each society or how English is taught and valued in these countries? So for
typically, I
example,
think,
I can tell you that my experience, I feel that uh, teaching English or to be a teacher is more valued in Ukraine, for example, than in Germany. But
mhm.
my experience was limited. I mean, I think compared to yours. So what can you share with me?
Well, I think when you talk about like teachers themselves, I think people who teach world languages tend to be a little bit maybe less conservative in some ways. Let's say maybe not less conservative, but you see fewer people who are like hyper conservative, and because of that, they tend to be very welcoming, very accepting, of people that are in their classrooms. But when it comes to like teaching in different countries, like if I were to compare teaching in Ukraine versus teaching in Thailand here, and this is not to stereotype or paint with, this is very broad strokes. There are loads of classrooms and teachers for whom what I'm about to say is not true. There's a tendency with a lot of, just as a personal example. So my own teaching, I tend to do a lot of task-based learning. I tend to do a lot of very deep end things. I try to make things very personalized, very communicative, which means that a lot of my activities don't have right or wrong answers. It's, if we're going over a really simple example of the present perfect, we might start with a brief activity where it's somehow or another we're going to discuss life experiences. And then we're going to get from that to the present perfect. For a lot of Thai students, when you work with them, if you ask them something about like their own life experience, they'll get a little bit confused. Um, because they'll say, teacher, but what's the answer? There is no right or wrong answer. So like it's what's true about you. So if there's no right answer, teacher, then what do I say? So that kind of very assessment heavy, very grades heavy, very, what's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? It's right because the teacher says it's right. So this attitude tends to be quite common. Now, it's easy to, well, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's not, let's say, overly difficult to introduce the students to something a bit more humanistic and get them on board with it, especially, but this is something that you see quite a bit. Um, so I think that's, if I'm thinking about working with students from different backgrounds, what I would be asking myself as a teacher going into work with a background that I never taught before, like let's say you gave me, or Argentinian students tomorrow. I've never taught Argentinian students. I know nothing about them. So I wouldn't be looking at things like what sort of L1 interference issues are Argentinian speakers going to have. That's kind of a down the road concern for me. Like eventually I will need to know that. But a short-term concern for me is going to be things like, how do these guys feel about talking to each other? What do they see the role of themselves and the teacher as in the classroom? What do they see the role of learning materials as? Like, are the learning materials going to be something which is like, this is the holy course book and we shall not deviate? Or is it going to be, we don't really like the course book, so we expect you to deviate? Or is it something in the middle? What's their attitude towards open-ended questions? What's their attitude towards grades and results? Insofar as this is partially culturally determined, partially kind of, and I mean that in terms of both big C, like Argentinian students, and small C, like that particular school or area. So I think that would be kind of the biggest thing that I would say is that, dealing with that first order psychological, how am I going to react to and access the lesson at my own kind of mental and emotional level? Because if we don't get that right, anything related to the language is pointless because we're never going to get that far. They're going to start arguing before we get there.
I see. Okay, so we're actually done with the questions which I prepared for you. And in Malta, we have, before having a podcast with our guests, we send a survey to Malta members telling them about our guests, and they prepare some questions and they send to you. And they send to me, and I ask you. Uh, consider this like just the old days when we first met, and
Okay,
I
you and I.
asked you this question about the two ladies.
Okay.
So the first question, somewhat similar to the question I asked you when we first met, but many people complain that when there is a change of teachers, you meet new students, students who have spent years with one teacher, and then well, there was a change. So one lady complains that the new students they never like what she does, even when she asks them for feedback or even when she tries to arrange the lessons to match their need, they
Mm-hmm.
never like.
Mm-hmm.
So it's somehow similar to the two ladies who always
Yeah.
together. Um, do you think it's pointless to try further, or there is always a way to deal with such situations? Maybe one day they try to, or they finally accept, or if they keep trying, they may end up with receiving bad feedback from the students that may, in the future, affect their career or at least their job where they work.
I mean, it's definitely a possibility that that could happen. I'm not going to say that that's an impossibility. I think when I hear cases like this, and this is in my own experience what I've found to be true, there are sometimes interpersonal problems that look like methodological problems. So what I mean by that is when the students have this sort of negative reaction to everything you do, I do have a bit of bad news, which is that it's not that they're having a bad reaction to the things you're doing. They're having a bad reaction to you. Now, that's going to happen to everyone at some point in their career, right? I've had students who straight up did not like me. And if I'm honest, I wasn't crazy about them either. But I would say before I started trying to bend everything to their will, um, let's imagine two scenarios, one where it's one or two students in a group, one where it's the whole group just had this teacher whom they adored, and now that's not you. One question that I ask my team when they come to me with issues that are of a similar nature is I ask them, okay, I want you to think about that student. I want you to tell me everything you know about them besides what they do in class. Where do they do for fun on the weekends? What are their hobbies? What's their pet's name? What you very often find is that the students whom you have the worst relationship with, you will have a hard time answering a lot of those questions. And the students whom you have a good relationship with, you actually answer those questions quite easily. You know where they went on holiday last year. You know what their families' names. You know the names of their significant others if they're adults. If it's a teenager, you'll know what their favorite video game is, their favorite anime character, or whatever it is, right? You'll just know. And for the ones who you don't get on with as well, you probably don't. So my step one would be forget about the teaching problem for a minute. Make an effort to find out as much as you can from that student or those students and connect with them on a personal level. Because once they know you and they trust you, they will likely start coming around to the things you do. Because very often we think that my students like me because they like my activities. No, it's often the other way around. The students like your activities because they like you. It's the same thing like when, what is it? There's the research that like when popular and attractive people say something, people are more likely to believe it. So it's that. So that would be my kind of immediate recommendation would be really invest in getting to know them, not making them like you, because that never works. Like you can't, we were all 14 once and tried to make someone like us and we failed miserably. Doesn't work. But get to know them, get to know things about them. What you will often find is that will start to change a bit. That's the other thing that I would suggest, and this is for more if it's a group level, is don't get them to think about if they like it or not. Get them to think about why they're doing it. Forget about liking, not liking for a little bit, because you're already losing that fight and you're probably going to lose it for a little bit longer. But a fight you can win is, why are we doing this like this? Once they start seeing the reasoning behind everything, because what you're really asking them to do is see the lesson from your point of view. You're asking for a bit of empathy from them. As they start to understand, hey, okay, so that's why we did that like that. Okay, well, I wasn't crazy about it at first, but I kind of see the logic now. Over time, this can change. And then if it's young learners, there are more detailed solutions that we could go into implementing things like token economies or like points systems where you introduce like competitive elements to kind of make things a bit gamified. But that's kind of very teenager, young learner specific. So without more information, that's what I would say.
Well, okay, thank you. The next question is from, she's a teacher and a student. She's one of our friends, Ukrainian friends here in Munich. She's an English teacher. At the same time, she's also studying German. So like two in one. She says people call her grammar nerd. When she teaches English, she loves teaching grammar, and when she's learning German, she cares so much about how grammar works more than improving her vocabulary. The good piece of news is that she is aware of the situation. The bad piece of news is that she does know how to find a balance between the grammar and the vocabulary. What piece of advice would you give her as a teacher and as a student? I know she's not studying English, but I
No,
mean,
that's
it's
quite
still in
language
the
in their
languages.
languages.
Yeah.
Well, it's good that she's aware of the issue. That's probably, step one is always admitting that you have a problem. So she's already past step one, which is really, really great. This often happens that when we think about language learning in general, there's kind of two mechanics that work, right? We've got a top down and a top down and a bottom up mechanic, where the top down mechanic is rules, structures, logic. And some people who have this sort of very deductive, rules based brain love this. People who have this more figure it out, pattern recognition, inductive way of doing things, they like this bottom up approach, which would be, looking at chunks of language, learning collocations, learning extensive vocabulary, and then both of these things kind of systematize and combine, and then we get a proficient speaker, right? So for this person who really, really likes this rules-based approach where like everything's got a place, and really, really is kind of like struggling to focus on vocabulary, etc. One way could be a shift in mindset a little bit. The shift in mindset that I might recommend, well, A, is I'm always going to recommend for people who have vocabulary issues, I'm always going to recommend extensive reading and listening. Because to become proficient, I don't know how many words it takes to become like a C2 level speaker of German, but I imagine it's something to 20 to 25,000, I would imagine. That seems to be a pretty fair number for, that's a lot of word lists. It's a lot of word lists. You'll probably have a much better time if you're reading things you enjoy. Even if it's a little bit slower at times, it'll be more enjoyable. One little trick that I've often used when learning languages myself is to read something once just to get the main idea, and then I read it again, and I kind of look for moments. What I call a moment is, oh, that's interesting, and that's a word I don't know, or I've not seen this word used like that. That's an interesting phrase. And then trying to just kind of use that whenever it comes up, because people, and the thing is, the first time you use it, you're going to use it wrong, but the person's going to correct you, and you think, okay, great, now I've got it. So this would be thing number 2. Thing number 3 that I would recommend is pairing the two. Like if you really like grammar, so let's say I'm going to use an English example, but I'm sure there's loads of examples in German that will work similarly. There's a technique called vertical expansion. It's really fun, where you take, for example, the word if, and let's say you're listening to a song or whatever, and it's got a bunch of ifs, a bunch of conditionals in it, where you would just write if, and you would write out every pattern that follows if, and look at it from that way. This is still technically an analysis of conditionals. It's still grammar. So it's going to scratch that little grammar itch that you've got in your head. But you're now combining this with the vocabulary. So you're also getting to see a bit more of that flexibility in how conditionals would be used. I don't know, because I don't speak German myself, so I don't know what an analogous structure would be in German, but I'm sure there must be one or two. So that would be another way to do it. So other than kind of the extensive reading and listening, combining the two. Look at how the grammar intersects with the vocabulary. Because if you already really like the grammar, you probably have a good command of that. So you'll be able to fit that knowledge in pretty easily, I think.
Thank you. The last question from the viewers, especially here in Germany, but I'm sure it exists in other countries, especially now with Ukrainians being just like Syrians, just like me, in many countries of the world. And of course, not everyone speaks languages. So someone said that about intensive courses. They have intensive courses here in Germany for German language. I think in England they also have some kind of courses, but I'm not sure. And many people complain, including myself, that intensive courses here are getting too much information in a short period of time, and they can't catch up with the information. So, what do you think about intensive courses? Do you think they are useful in some way, or one way or another, or they're a total waste of time?
I think it depends on what your goal is, because, and this is where we often have to recognize that our goals as users can be very different from the goals of administrators, and the way that we measure those goals as learners intuitively may be different from the way that those goals are being measured by the people delivering the course. Which, if there's too big of a difference, this is certainly a problem in how things are being set up. With intensive courses, I mean, is the goal of an intensive course to really learn everything at a super duper deep level and become proficient? Or is it to make sure that you can survive and get you just good enough to be able to do that and then turn you loose? Now, if your goal is the second, which is like, okay, I'm kind of in a hard situation, I need to get enough just to get by, and then I can figure out what I'm going to do from there. That might not, then if you get to that point, that might not be a bad result. the problem might be a poor communication of expectations from the course. Like, if I'm sure that if someone walks into I'm using the royal you, so all of us, if someone walks into an intensive course and they said, hey, look, there's going to be a 6-week course, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. You are not going to be an A2 level speaker, because even then that would only be what, 60 hours? No, math, 6 times 5. That would only be 35 hours. 35 hours is like a fourth of a Cepher level. Like, come on, like, what are you really going to get in that? Well, if you're looking to progress a Cepher level, that's not going to do it for you. You got to study longer. But like, if your goal is, hey, I just want to like not be scared when I have to order coffee, and like I want to be able to go to the bank and sort of get my documents sorted, and I want to be able to talk to my landlord and just negotiate like when the rent's getting paid this month. If the sender or the course provider is being really upfront about that, saying, hey, look, this is a crash course. This isn't like, you're not going to get to a high level doing this, but you will get to a level doing this, and that might be better than what you've currently got. So are they worthwhile? Yeah, if it meets your need. I think it's just a matter of, and this is the responsibility ultimately of the centers, to communicate this clearly, but also for us as clients at some level to make sure that we understand what we're signing up for, because great expectations can lead to great disappointment.
That's the problem we always face when we have students who spend 6 months for A1, then 6 months for A2, 6 months for, so in 1 year they reach level C1 in 1 year.
Doable.
Like they come to us and they sit during the lesson, and when we are talking, say, ah, like as if we're just speaking Chinese or something. So they don't differentiate between finishing a level and finishing a course.
Well, and that's also why, I sometimes get a bit of complaints from people for this, but I'm a big proponent of external proficiency exams. And I personally have the most experience with Cambridge exams. I personally have a lot of faith in Cambridge exams, but they're not the only good exams out there. The PTE is a fine test. The Duolingo English test, I'm sure, is fine. I've not worked with it much, but I'm sure it's a fine test. The IELTS is a fine test. But having that external accreditation, that's something we do in our program. We don't, and that's something when people look for language courses, one of the things that I do tell them is, like, when you're looking at a school, do they have any sort of external verification of their results? So doesn't matter what exam that is per se, there's lots of options, but is there some sort of external verification? Otherwise, it's exactly what you're talking about, where, after a year, they're in the C1 class. And have I known people who got from A0 to C1 in a year? Yeah, I know one person who's done it. Exactly one person. So they exist, but there's not many of them. So yeah.
I see. So we're getting to the end of this podcast, and the last question I'd like to ask, based on read in your CV about you having built online CPD, which is continuing professional development course and ecosystems. Do you have 3 recommendations you would like to give for the new teachers or teachers who want to grow, especially in some countries where uh, teachers can really have great future? For example, like Ukraine, we have we have been there. It's not exclusively Ukraine, but countries like Ukraine, teachers in these countries. But with the
You
three
mean, like, you're
recommendations.
looking for like specific courses, or like things to bear in mind for people who are designing CPD?
No, no, for the teachers, for not for designers, for teachers,
Okay.
because yeah.
One, the first one that I'm going to say is that when you're looking for a teacher development course, especially if you're early on in your career, I would really be looking to do a program, especially if I'm in the first 3 years of my career, which offers assessed teaching practice. Full stop, end of story. There needs to be assessed teaching practice there. Someone's got to look at what you're doing. Everyone thinks they're an expert in the first 3 years of teaching. I also thought I was an expert in the first 3 years of teaching, and I was not. I very much was not. I'm not even an expert now, and this is many years later. So this is one thing that I would say. Now, I am a very strong believer in the CELTA myself personally. You could say I'm a bit biased because I've been a CELTA trainer for 6 years. But that's not the only teaching qualification which has assessed teaching practice. There's, the Cert TEFL from Trinity. The main point is, one, look for assessed teaching practice. It's scary, but it's worthwhile, and you're going to notice a big difference. The second is, when you're looking for CPD, it's very tempting to look for topics that are new and interesting and exciting. And if you've been teaching for 5, 6, 8 years, go for it. Cool, whatever. If you're early in your career, again, like years 1 to 3, fundamentals, because this is where you're going to want to make sure, okay, that you know what really goes into things like, if we talk about developing listening skills, what actually happens when people listen? How does this actually work? What are different explanations that there are? Like, what are the basics? And when I say fundamentals, I don't mean the basics. I mean like the building blocks of like, how does this work? So courses that focus on kind of building this really solid fundamental understanding of how things are going. Without naming any specific courses. And then for number 3 for CPD, honestly, is get a buddy. Find a friend. Find someone who you can go to. They can be a mentor, so someone who is more experienced than you, who kind of helps you out or talks to you about things, and every now and then you buy them lunch. This could be a friend who's interested in lots of the same things you are, and you bounce ideas off each other. And maybe from time to time, you go to their class and watch them do something, and they come to your class and watch you do something, give you a bit of feedback on how it went. The biggest thing is, if you take the buddy, the friend approach, you have to make sure that you hit this right balance of being supportive, but not being too supportive, where you're kind of enabling bad habits. But finding a friend, finding someone to run ideas by, this is extremely developmental. And if you're, I know we said not to talk about designers, but if you're a program administrator and you're watching this, encouraging your staff to do this and building this in at every possible opportunity is going to be a massive benefit, A, for your school culture, because everyone's going to start liking each other more. And B, it's going to mean that this body of knowledge that's in separate classrooms in your school is going to start going between the classrooms. I've learned so much from my colleagues, even from people whom I've observed or managed, that's really, really important. And if I add one more, it's, I guess, point number 4, which is get in the classroom and watch other people.
We're going to give 10, as many as you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So get in the classroom and watch other people. Like, one of the things that's really developed me so much, just as a CELTA trainer, I've spent over 1,000 hours sitting and watching people teach. Just watching. So like, I don't have to imagine if something's going to work or not. In most cases, I've seen something similar at this point, even if I've never done it myself. And in most cases, I do see things that I learn all the time from trainees, or they'll have a way of engaging students while checking the answers to an activity. I'll think, well, I've never thought to do it that way, but that was really cool. Okay, taking that from me. So, take the private, because being a teacher is very lonely. I guess if I had to summarize all of it, because I was talking about a lot of things, teaching is a very lonely job, actually, because it's just us in front of our students. We talk to each other in the teacher's room and we see our colleagues over a coffee, but when we start teaching, it's just us and the students. Finding as many ways to take that into being social and sharing with other people, eventually you'll get to where you want to be.
Thank you very much. Well, I think you can ask my wife. She's also a teacher, but it wouldn't be only lunch. or dinner, that's what you ask for, a present. Yeah. Okay. So, Chris, thank you very much for being with me today. I hope, and I'm sure everyone who's going to watch this podcast will really benefit from what we have been discussing and from all the information you have given. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Ali.
And for our dear melted viewers, this podcast is, as always, going to be into two versions: the video version and the audio version, on the two channels, my own channel, Teachers Lounge, and on Melted Podcast. So thank you very much for watching, and see you later with another podcast.